Welcome, everyone. Today we are looking at a film that wasn't just directed. It was, uh, it was really hammered into existence out of personal crisis, out of sheer ambition, and frankly, physical torment.
We're talking about Martin Scorsese's 1980 masterpiece, Raging Bull.
Exactly. And it's a film that, when it was released, it seemed almost like it was designed to fail. Yet today, it stands as one of the most revered and even protected cinematic works in American history.
That's the fascinating thing, isn't it? That split identity. It was a commercial disappointment, but at the same time, an immediate critical sensation.
And that's really what we want to get into here.
Right. We're going to bypass a simple retelling of the plot. We know you're familiar with the story of Jake LaMotta, the middleweight champion who was just consumed by his own rage and jealousy.
So our focus is going to be on everything else. The cultural shockwaves, the almost impossible production story.
The casting choices, which were revolutionary, the technical decisions that cemented its influence, and how that legacy is so strong, it's still inspiring legal battles today.
Okay, so for context, it's a biographical sports drama. A neo-noir, really. It's an adaptation of LaMotta's 1970 memoir.
But here's that paradox you mentioned. The film premieres in November 1980, and people just didn't really go to see it.
The numbers are pretty stark. It made about $23.4 million.
Against an $18 million budget. Now, that doesn't sound like a total bomb today, but for a Scorsese De Niro picture, with that level of critical praise.
It was bewildering. It tells you that maybe audiences just weren't ready for such a raw, unflinching look at a hero who was so completely unsympathetic.
You called it a neo-noir, and I think that's a perfect description. Can we unpack that for a moment?
Yeah, because it's a biopic, right?
Yeah.
Not what you typically think of as noir.
It's not about detectives and dames, no. But thematically, it's pure noir. You have the stark, low-key, black and white cinematography creating all those shadows.
A real sense of moral decay.
And most importantly, you have this isolated, self-destructive protagonist. I mean, Jake LaMotta is a man who is literally his own doom. The film just tracks his disintegration, and it feels completely inescapable.
That fatalism.
That is pure noir.
A vision that ultimately became this American monument. But as you said, getting it made was a fight in itself. Let's start there with the unlikely genesis of the project.
Okay, so if you're asking who really willed Raging Bull into existence, the answer, surprisingly, is Robert De Niro.
Not Scorsese.
Definitely not Scorsese. De Niro read LaMotta's autobiography when he was on the set of The Godfather Part 2, and he was just immediately gripped by the character.
And it's interesting because sources say the book itself, the writing, it wasn't exactly high literature.
No, De Niro himself was disappointed by the writing style, but he was looking past the prose. He saw this deep well of self-destruction and aggression.
He knew it was cinematic.
He knew it could be electric on screen. He saw the raw honesty in LaMotta's confessions. And he was persistent. He showed the book to Scorsese as early as 1974.
While they were making Alice. Alice doesn't live here anymore. And Scorsese said no.
Repeatedly. It's one of the great ironies. The director was actively trying to avoid the material that would, define so much of his legacy.
His reasons were pretty clear, right?
Twofold, really. First, he said he just didn't get the story. He couldn't connect with the character's motivations. And second, and maybe this is the bigger point, he just plain disliked boxing.
He really disliked it. He had that famous quote about sports in general.
He was very clear. He called boxing boring.
Mm-hmm.
He dismissed it completely. He had this broader view saying anything with a ball, no good. So a boxing film was just completely outside of his interests.
He saw no art in it.
None at all.
So what changed? What was the seismic event that made him go from no to this becoming the most necessary film of his life?
This is where the story gets incredibly personal. The sources all point to this one critical, life-altering moment for Scorsese. He was going through a period of immense personal and professional stress, and he suffered a near-fatal drug overdose.
It was his absolute rock bottom.
Exactly. And when he was recovering, trying to piece his life and his career back together, that's when he agreed to make the film. He saw it less as an artistic choice and more as
an act of survival.
An act of self-preservation, yeah. He said he was making it to save his own life. He needed something immensely difficult to pour his own demons into.
So LaMotta's story of self-destruction became a mirror for his own.
Precisely. That's how he was able to reframe it in his mind. It stopped being a boring movie about boxing matches. The ring itself became a metaphor.
An allegory for whatever you do in life.
Right. For him, it became about movie making. The fight for funding, the brutal critics, the aggression you need to survive. He finally started to relate to Jake LaMotta's self-inflicted pain.
And that reframing, you can see it in every technical choice he makes. Let's talk about the decision to shoot in black and white. For a major studio film in 1980, that was a huge risk.
It was a layered decision. It was part art, part surprising practicality. The first idea came from the great British director Michael Powell, who was a mentor to Scorsese.
The director of The Red Shoes.
That's him. So Scorsese showed him some early 8mm color test footage of De Niro training, and Powell made this observation that boxing gloves in that era, they weren't bright red.
Right. They were more muted.
They would have been maroon, oxblood, or black. The colors in the test footage just didn't feel authentic.
So black and white solves that problem instantly.
Mm-hmm.
But Scorsese's reasoning went much deeper.
Oh, much deeper. Aesthetically, it immediately set the film apart from all the bright, kind of garish color films of the time. It gave it this timeless, almost documentary feel.
It forces you to focus on emotion, on texture.
And the second function is just fascinating. It has to do with film preservation.
This is Scorsese, the film historian, coming out.
It is. He knew that the color film stock of the late 70s and early 80s was notoriously unstable. It would fade and shift over time. So by shooting in black and white, he was essentially guaranteeing that the film's visual integrity would last for decades.
He was thinking about its legacy during production. That's incredible.
It's an ultimate act of artistic stewardship.
And he brought that same level of detail to the atmosphere inside the ring, even though he hated the sport.
Well, he needed that visceral realism because he hated it. He had to understand the mechanics of the violence to translate Jake's inner chaos. He went to 2 matches at Madison Square Garden just for research.
And what did he take away from that?
The grime, the stuff that television usually cleans up. He noticed the little things, like the blood sponge and the horrifying way blood would splatter on the ropes and soak in.
It wasn't clean. It was primal.
He famously said, after watching it up close, and they call this sport, that sense of disgust is all over the fight scenes. They feel less like a competition and more like a ritual sacrifice.
That mix of disgust and authenticity is why it's so unsettling to watch. Even the title was apparently up for debate.
It was. They kicked around a few ideas. Prizefighter was one. The Jake LaMotta story.
Prizefighter is very direct.
Scorsese actually liked it at first, but he worried that a title like that would make audiences think the film was only about boxing.
Which was the opposite of what he wanted.
Exactly. He needed the title to reflect the internal state of the character, the untamable rage. Raging Bull just captures that psychological element perfectly.
And capturing that internal rage on the page was a battle in itself. The screenplay process sounds just as brutal as one of LaMotta's fights.
It was an extremely difficult birth. Scorsese's frequent collaborator, Martin, wrote the first draft.
And the studio, United Artists, hated it.
Rejected it outright. Martin's script was apparently trying to capture the sort of romantic, old-school feel of boxing in the 40s, but it just didn't have the psychological darkness that Scorsese and De Niro wanted. It was too conventional.
So they bring in Paul Schrader,
the writer of Taxi Driver. He came in for a very quick but very vital rewrite in the summer of '78.
And what was his key contribution?
Structure and intensity. For one, the character of Joey LaMotta, Jake's brother, he was barely in Martin's original script. Schrader was the one who built up that character, and suddenly you have the film's central relationship, that dynamic of codependence and conflict. Schrader also added some of the darker, more memorable scenes.
Even with Schrader's script, though, the studio was still nervous.
Very nervous. This is late 1978, and the executives were worried the content was so raw, the violence, the paranoia, that it might get an X rating.
Which would have been a commercial death sentence.
Completely. They were terrified of backing this prestigious film that no one would be allowed to see.
So this is when Scorsese and De Niro just take over the script themselves.
Yes. They took Schrader's draft and holed up for 2.5 weeks on the island of St. Martin, and they do these massive uncredited rewrites.
And their focus was on tightening that psychological lens, right?
Completely. They made huge structural changes. For instance, they cut the character of Jake and Joey's father entirely.
Why was that so important?
Because it removes any external cause for Jake's aggression. His rage just is. It doesn't come from his father. It comes from inside him. They also dialed way back on the role of organized crime.
So the conflict becomes purely internal. The tragedy is all his own doing.
100%. It's all about his paranoia. And this is where we have to be very clear about the cruelty LaMotta inflicted on his family, especially on his wife, Vicky.
The film is unflinching about it, and we must handle it with sympathy for the victims.
Absolutely. The source material is clear that his actions were driven by this toxic, all-consuming jealousy. His physical assaults on Joey and Vicky are just agonizing to watch because they're completely irrational.
And then there's the incident with the boxer, Tony De Niro, which is maybe the most telling moment of all.
It's horrifying. Vicky makes an offhand comment that De Niro is good-looking, and Jake, in this fit of jealous rage, doesn't just go out and win the fight.
He punishes him.
He deliberately and brutally disfigures him. He turns a boxing match into an act of punitive violence aimed indirectly at his wife, who has to sit there and watch it. It's rage masquerading as sport.
That kind of emotional destruction needs a powerful ending, which leads to that iconic final scene in the dressing room.
The "I could have been a contender" scene, but that wasn't the original idea.
I read they considered Shakespeare, Richard III.
They did, an excerpt about deformity and inner evil. But again, Michael Powell, his mentor, stepped in. He advised Scorsese against it. He felt it was too distant.
Not culturally relevant for an Italian-American boxer from the Bronx.
Exactly. He needed a reference point from LaMotta's world, and On the Waterfront was perfect. That Marlon Brando speech is the ultimate lament of self-sabotage and lost potential. It just lands with this gut punch of American tragedy.
It's another one of those small changes from the St. Martin rewrite that just defines the whole film.
And it shows how essential their uncredited work was.
From the script, we move to the performances, which are just legendary. Scorsese is famous for casting newcomers, and this film might be the best example.
De Niro was the one really pushing for fresh faces, and his discovery of Joe Pesci to play Joey is one of those great Hollywood stories.
Because Pesci had basically given up on acting.
He was completely out of the business. De Niro saw him in a low-budget 1976 movie, The Death Collector, and just knew he had the right energy. But when they found him, Pesci hadn't acted in 4 years. He was working in an Italian restaurant in New Jersey.
Pulled right out of obscurity.
And his career was just completely reborn. The chemistry between him and De Niro, that improvisational, violent energy, it feels so real.
And the casting of Vicky LaMotta was just as bold, maybe even more controversial.
Kathy Moriarty, Joe Pesci actually suggested her after seeing her picture in a club. She was only 18 years old.
An 18-year-old in that incredibly demanding, mature role. That was to raise some eyebrows.
It did. But Scorsese and De Niro saw her potential. She had this husky voice and a maturity beyond her years. But they had to fight for her, especially with the Screen Actors Guild.
How did they convince them?
They had to present a whole series of comparison photos showing the resemblance between Moriarty and the real Vicky LaMotta, just to prove she was right for the part.
But the gamble paid off.
Massively. Her debut was a triumph. The great Vincent Canby at the New York Times called her one of the film finds of the decade. She's incredible in it.
Which brings us to Robert De Niro and what is still probably the gold standard for physical transformation in acting.
It's the performance that defines the film's legend. His preparation was just immense. He trained with the real Jake LaMotta.
And LaMotta was impressed, wasn't he?
Astonished. He claimed De Niro was so good he could have been a top 20 middleweight boxer. De Niro even had 3 real sparring matches in Brooklyn to get the feel for it.
He won 2 of them.
He won 2 of them. It was about internalizing the physicality of a fighter.
But the truly staggering part, the thing that halted the entire production, was the weight gain.
This is what sets it apart. They shut down production for nearly 4 months.
And the entire cast and crew stayed on payroll.
They did. So De Niro could go on a binge-eating tour of Europe to authentically gain the weight of the older, retired LaMotta. No fat suit.
It's unheard of. The studio agreed to stop a multi-million-dollar film so their star could eat pasta.
It shows you the power they had. He went through Italy and France just deliberately putting on the pounds.
And the numbers are incredible. He went from, what, 145?
A lean 145 pounds as the champion boxer up to a staggering 215 pounds.
A 60-pound gain.
60 pounds. And it took a huge toll on his health. When they came back to film the later scenes, you can see it. It changed his posture, his breathing, even the way he talked. It was a massive physical sacrifice for the role.
That's beyond method acting. That's a physical submission to the character. And the way they filmed the fights was just as revolutionary.
Scorsese was adamant. No traditional, detached spectator views. He wanted the camera inside the ring.
So how did they do that?
The cinematographer, Michael Chapman, was basically in there with them. He had to operate the camera like an invisible third opponent, ducking and weaving around these choreographed punches.
It makes it feel so claustrophobic.
You feel the impact. And the fights themselves, they weren't just brawls. Scorsese choreographed them like complex dance routines. The violence has a rhythm that reflects Jake's state of mind.
So after all that commitment, all that visionary work, the film comes out in November 1980, and we're back to that strange, polarized reaction.
The box office was weak, no question. The public seemed to struggle with the violence and the unlikable main character. But the critics knew immediately that they were seeing something special.
The reviews were ecstatic.
Pauline Kael at The New Yorker got it completely. She called it a biography of the genre of prize fighting. And my favorite phrase she used was tabloid grand opera.
That's perfect. The low-life story with the high-art operatic score.
And Jack Kroll at Newsweek just flat out called it the best movie of the year. The critical consensus was almost instantaneous.
And that acclaim rolled right into awards season.
It did. It led the pack with 8 Oscar nominations. It didn't win Best Picture or Director, but it got the 2 that really mattered. Best Actor for De Niro, which was a lock.
A validation of that incredible commitment.
And Best Editing for Thelma Schoonmaker, which recognized the film's brilliant technical construction.
There's also a really chilling historical footnote about that year's Oscar ceremony. The timing was just unbelievable.
It's a dark piece of history. The ceremony was held on March 31st, 1981, the day before President Ronald Reagan was shot by John Hinckley Jr.
And Hinckley was obsessed with Jodie Foster from Taxi Driver.
A Scorsese film starring De Niro, the connection was immediate and terrifying.
It created a genuine security threat for Scorsese.
A very real one. Out of fear of a copycat attack, Martin Scorsese attended the Academy Awards that night with FBI bodyguards. They were disguised as guests, escorting him through the evening. It just shows you the insane cultural pressures surrounding his work at that time.
It's hard to even imagine that. But beyond the awards, the film's legacy is so tied to that post-production craftsmanship. Thelma Schoonmaker's editing is legendary.
It is the film's backbone. Her work is so essential to the rhythm and the psychological impact that years later, in 2012, the Motion Picture Editors Guild voted Raging Bull the single best edited film in history.
That is an incredible honor.
It is. She had to balance the brutal, fast-paced energy of the fights with the slow, suffocating drama of the domestic scenes. It's a masterclass.
And if the editing is the architecture, the sound design is the texture.
You can't overlook the sound. It was a 6-month mix, which is an eternity. The sound designer, Frank Warner, had to balance these quiet, dialogue-heavy scenes with the explosive chaos of the ring.
And the detail was obsessive,
Yeah,
right?
Completely. Every single sound was treated differently. Every punch had its own unique sound effect. Every camera flashbulb. It's what makes the fights feel both horrifyingly real and somehow stylized at the same time.
All of that is why the film's reputation just grew and grew, completely eclipsing that initial box office stumble.
The canonization happened fast. By the end of the 80s, critics like Roger Ebert were calling it the best film of the decade, and then came the official recognition.
From the Library of Congress.
In 1990, its very first year of eligibility, it was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. That speed is almost unheard of.
And the American Film Institute agrees.
In their 2007 list, they ranked it as the 4th greatest American movie ever made. It's considered an absolute titan of cinema, both here and globally.
A huge part of that power, as we touched on, is the soundtrack. It's not a traditional score.
No, it's a curated soundscape. Scorsese worked with Robbie Robertson, and they used songs from Scorsese's own collection of 78s.
So it's music that LaMotta would have actually heard in bars or on the radio.
Exactly. It's about period authenticity. But the masterstroke, the thing that gives the film that grand opera feel, is the use of Italian opera.
Specifically the composer Pietro Mascagni.
Yes. The main theme, the music over those iconic slow-motion opening credits, is the intermezzo from Cavalleria Rusticana. It just elevates the story.
It turns this gritty boxing story into something almost mythic, a universal tragedy.
It gives LaMotta's struggle this sense of doomed ancestral weight. It connects his personal pain to a much larger cultural story.
And the film's cultural power is so strong that decades later, the rights to that story led to a major legal battle.
This is a wild story. In the mid-2000s, a new film was developed based on a later memoir by LaMotta, and it was being marketed as Raging Bull 2.
A sequel and a prequel.
Right. And MGM, who by then owned the rights to the original film, stepped in aggressively.
They sued to stop it.
They filed a lawsuit in 2012, arguing they own the exclusive rights to any sequel, and their argument wasn't just financial.
It was about protecting the legacy.
Exactly. They argued that a new film calling itself a sequel could tarnish the reputation of Scorsese's classic. They were fighting to protect the name.
And this dispute went all the way to the Supreme Court.
It did. The case was Petrella v. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Now, it was about a complex copyright issue, but the fight at its core was about the value of the narrative universe that the 1980 film had created.
So what was the outcome?
The case was ultimately settled, but the producers of the new film had to agree to change the title. It was released in 2016 as The Bronx Bull.
And they couldn't market it as a sequel.
They couldn't. It's this powerful example of how fiercely a studio will guard the cultural identity of a true classic.
It's the perfect end of the story, really. A film born from crisis that failed at the box office, only to become so revered it's legally protected as a piece of high art.
It completely transcends the sports genre. It's a timeless allegory for rage and the impossible search for redemption. It's a landmark defined by its technical perfection and the absolute revolutionary commitment of everyone who made it.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you. The legal battle over the Bronx Bull shows how fiercely MGM thought to stop the tarnishing of Raging Bull's reputation. So consider what this tells us about how we value classic films now.
It seems to suggest that some films become so culturally important that their value isn't just in the movie itself, but in the entire narrative universe it created. A universe that has to be protected at all costs from anything that might diminish its power.
That's something to think about. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.